Hello and welcome to a City Voices interview with Christopher Ancona. Christopher is a neuroscience and social psychology researcher, the author of the Alignment Quotient, which helps people align with the rhythms of life. And he offers guidance to clients to help them align themselves based on those principles in his book. How did I do, Christopher Ancona?
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
It's not the greatest, right?
No, it's good. It's good.
How would you make it better?
Well, I mean, when it comes to the concept of alignment, it's really aligning like all of your actions and how you interact with the world with who you are. So it's starting with what's deep inside you and who am I, and then it's projecting outward into your everyday life of that instead of letting the world kind of throw you around and toss you out of alignment.
How long have you been doing working with clients based on the principles of the alignment quotient?
Well, I mean, so I'm really bad with the whole concept of clients. I'm usually just helping people. So I've been working on in this area, particularly starting with the research part for 20 some years now. Um, and then it all started with just kind of like, well, first it started with helping myself, obviously, but then just helping other people, like just talking with people through things. And then it just happens to be now that I have a book and a course that there's a way for me to charge for some of that, and I have some clients with that.
But
But
it
I'm
started with your realizations through research. Now, me and Tiffany, now, Tiffany, you can like chime in anytime.
Mhm.
Tiffany and I are, of course, layman's. My name is Layman Frey, and that's Layman McGuire. And and so it started with research. You got well, where did you get when how did the ideas pop into your head? Tell us about the research that ensued and then come to us with the denouement of the book.
Well, I think like a lot of people who get into this space, it actually started out with me and with my life. And so I'm an engineer. I also have a master's degree, and basically my childhood led me into engineering. Well, when I was a kid, I thought I'd be a priest. Like that was my original goal. I had a very troubled relationship with my father. I ended up escaping when I was 12. My grandparents took me in, and then I spent the rest of my teen years wanting to prove everything he said about me wrong. So I was like stupid. You can imagine all the types of things that are negative that a parent can tell you. And I just wanted to prove him wrong. So I became an electrician when he said I couldn't, I couldn't, was bad at everything. I became a football player when he said I was weak. I mean, everything I wanted to prove him wrong. And that led me down the path to an engineering degree. But when I got my engineering degree, I'd realized, wait a second, like this isn't like maybe I don't like this. Maybe I don't want to be an engineer. But when you're in a good place based upon those bad experiences, you realize, well, you don't want to throw it out. Like it's not like I'm going to do opposite of engineering. Like I don't know what that would be. And it's like, well, if I want to plot now my own way and stop just going against what my dad had said and needing to prove him wrong, how do I even set out on my own course going forward? Like, how do I even create it? I don't even know. Everything that I have, everything that I am is based upon a not wanting to be called something. And that set me on the path of how is this even possible? Like how would you do it? How would you go about it? How would you even figure out where to start from? And so that's how the path started. That's how the path was motivated. And then from there, I started with religion because I wanted to be a priest. And then I dug into philosophy. And then in 2009, I met a professor at the University of Iowa, and I was telling him about my ideas and everything, which are all philosophy and religion based. And he's like, well, did you check this? And did you check that? And he's talking about it from a neuroscience and social psychology base. And I'm like, ooh, I don't know any of that stuff. I need to. And so then I actually went to the University of Iowa. I was working there and doing far more research in neuroscience and social psychology and kind of blending these things together with the religious and the philosophy aspect with the neuroscience, social psychology. And it got way deep. So there's parts of this I'm working on that I'm not sure I'll ever finish before I die, right? Because the topics go very big, very deep, and get very difficult, right? Like answering the question, is free will even a possibility in the universe? And what is consciousness? So I got into really difficult questions because if free will doesn't exist, there's no such thing as a choice. So why worry about choosing? And if you don't understand what consciousness is, well, how do you actually go about choosing who you are? So it's these things become very, very important to the idea, and they're at the edge of research right now. So it's a really tough area. It's a very tough area and very interesting. So, and then I can go into as much research as you want, right? But hopefully,
All right. So it was a difficult with your father, and you were trying to prove something, to prove him wrong, and you you achieved electrician and engineer, and but then you started to think about, why am I doing these things? What's my real purpose? And you started studying research, yeah, religion, and well, eventually you started studying neuroscience after you met a professor from the University of Iowa, and and then he got you into studying neuroscience and social psychology,
yeah,
and you combine that with the religion that you were studying before and your philosophy that you were studying before, and that led you to get degrees and to continue and to do research in these areas. Now, and then ultimately it culminated in the alignment quotient book, right?
yeah.
All right. Now, Tiffany, do you have any questions for Chris yet?
At this point, I'm formulating questions and really thinking of the concept of, because we went through a lot there, the concept of consciousness and the concept of free will and those things. And so I'm definitely having a not mental vacation. So I'm over here with that. So finding a question around anything right now is a bit much for me. I'm
That's
gonna
all
have
right.
one. I'm gonna have one.
Tiffany, keep,
Okay.
it'll percolate. It's going to percolate. We're having a conversation with Chris. Chris, we didn't prepare questions. We're having a conversation, and
Yeah.
questions will
Yeah.
arise because we're
Yeah.
going to try, we're going to strive to live in alignment during this conversation. Now, Chris, tell us about the alignment quotient and how it came to be.
Yeah. So, well, so from the time of starting to do the research, in the research section of it, I was working at the University of Iowa and building what's called the Neuro Leadership Labs. And the idea was, how do you do leadership training for people in a way that actually will work? Because they didn't believe that the leadership training that existing was really good enough. And what the professor realized is a lot of that is overcoming your own stuff. Like your own stuff is getting in your way of you being a really good leader. It's the question is, how do you do that? And the research there didn't really go into the alignment quotient stuff yet, but it looked at, okay, what types of things are controlling you and preventing you from getting into the place that you want to be as a leader or as a manager or whatever. And a lot of that comes back to stories that you're telling yourself from your past, which may have some truth or may have been useful at some point in your past and are no longer serving you. And the other one is just brain-based mechanisms, things that are hardwired into us that trigger us and then throw us back into those stories. So after that, I'd actually written another book called Psychological Safety, and safety is an acronym. And they're the brain-based triggers that basically, when you get triggered, it just drives you wherever your brain naturally goes. So the safety stands for security. So that's the need for certainty and consistency. So if you're very sensitive to that and somebody wants to control you, all they have to do is push that button and they totally control your life, right? There's autonomy. So how much need do you have to feel like you're in control of your environment and your situations? Fairness, which is the need to be part of and see equal exchanges. Esteem, which is where am I in the social hierarchy? Am I better or worse than other people? And where am I relative to them? And how sensitive am I to that? Which is a very interesting one, right? T, trust, which is about kind of an in-group bias. Like, are you part of my group or not? And I'll treat you differently if you're actually part of my in-group. So this is actually used a lot. This is not it's like even salespeople use it. It's very, very common trigger. And then the why, which is really like your purpose and meaning and your need to have a why. So these are the triggers, and you have different sensitivities to them, and you can drive people around like that. And when I learned some of the aspects of these, I didn't like it because it meant that somebody else controlled me, not me. And so that kind of went into a lot of the things to watch out for and things to overcome. And I noticed I'd read a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning, which is a quite famous book. I don't know if you've heard about it or read it, but fantastic. He was a prisoner of war. He was in the World War II concentration camps, and he was a doctor. So he was a Jew that was put in there, but he was a doctor, so he was in charge of the hospital. And he goes through some really tough stories. And I don't want to give away too much of this. But one of the things that really stuck out to me was, they have a hospital and people that are sick come in and everybody would get a piece of bread. And he said one of the things they had to guard against was people coming into the hospital and stealing the bread from the sick and dying, because of course bread was life. And it's like, well, you're going to die, so I'm just going to take your bread so that I can live, or I have a chance to live. But he said what he couldn't account for was some people would come into the hospital and share their bread with the sick and dying, which made no logical sense from a survival perspective. And the only thing he could come to the conclusion what it was about is this was who this person was, and they were not going to let that situation or circumstances change them. And I thought, wow, that's profound. That means that these triggers, these safety triggers, you can overcome them. And you overcome them by staying in alignment with who you are. And you go, okay, this is my situation, but this is who I am. And you just keep going forward. And you accept whatever comes your way. I mean, those people were accepting, this might kill me, but this is who I am. And I just found that really a powerful lesson. And so that kind of started getting into my book and things. And I didn't at that point I hadn't written the book. I actually from 2010, it took me another 8 years before I sat down to write the book. And I actually wrote the book when I was taking care of my grandma when she was dying, and I was on night shift and my sister was on day shift, so she needed 24 hours. And my grandma would sleep a bit, and so I would start writing while she was sleeping, and that's when I decided to write it because I wrote it wanted to be something that I was there because I wanted to show her that I was able to do this and put something good out into the world. So yeah, so that's kind of the whole thing there.
Now, being in alignment means that you've overcome fear of death.
Being in alignment means, well, so there's a really particular way, because I actually get into being, and this is why the consciousness stuff is really important to me, because what does it mean to be? And what I believe that who I am is independent of what I have. So most people live their lives and they say, okay, I need to have this so I can do this, so I can be this person, right? So I gotta have a lot of money so I can do, go to big parties and host big parties and have yachts and stuff so I can be important, right? Or I have to have a good job so I can so I can do the good dad thing so I can be as a good father. And so this is the way it tends to work. But the reality is people who live that way, which is actually most people, um, they lose that thing. And they didn't lose a thing. They lost who they were. And I actually had a friend who was a mechanic, and he was a great dad, and that's what he was. He was the provider. And then he hurt his back so bad he could never be a mechanic again. And he went into a depression because for him, he was no longer able to be a good dad. And so it's like, okay, well, wait a second, because I don't have an income, it means I can't be a good dad. Well, that doesn't make any, when you really think about it, that doesn't make any sense. But that's what we do when we live have do be. So I said, okay, well, what happens if you switch that around? And you start with, okay, who am I? And then I'm going to do what there is to do to be consistent with that. And then I'll have a result, right? And you don't expect you're necessarily going to be able to control that result because you're going to be who you're going to be. And the example from Viktor Frankl let me know that, okay, in that particular case, they were who they were, they did what there was to do, and then they were going to have a result. And okay, that result in that particular case might be to die, right? But they had come to their own. I mean, war is a pretty crazy thing, and there's a lot of stuff that happens in war, and you're in a state where this is a possibility. So chances are most people aren't going to be confronted with death every day, right? But we are confronted with a lot of other things that do cause fear, and those fear, by the way, tend to be caused by the safety triggers, right? My security is threatened, my autonomy is threatened, my fairness, I see fairness as a problem, esteem, right? Trust. So those are the things that typically put you into that fight or flight stage, which is the fear response.
I see Tiffany nodding her head.
Oh no, I'm in agreement. I'm in 100% agreement. I love everything that you're saying here. I was wondering as you were talking there about a person being who they are and who they want to be, that is based upon a situation thrown into a way of being that they don't enjoy. This is not who the person they want to be, right? Um, do you do you have any guidance or words of encouragement for that person who's completely found themselves at the bottom of the pit of reality?
Well, it's interesting. There's because I deal with some people that are suffering, right? They're in bad places. And the being stuff is really far from where they are. It's hard to see because they're in survival mode. And sometimes that survival mode, it's if you're not ready for this and you're in that survival space, it's tough. But let me take a step back and get into being, and this will help move, I think, forward to where you want to get. And I'll start with a survey that I started doing, and I'm still working on because I need to get a bigger and bigger data set, but I can tell you the initial results. So I just asked two questions. Question one is, you meet somebody online, you can't see them, nothing, and you have to tell them who you are. Go. And do it in a short amount of words. And what you would expect happens. I'm 5'7". I'm blonde hair. I'm a teacher. I'm a parent. I come from Chicago. These are the types of things that people give. And I categorize them in looking for, it's your roles, it's your physical characteristics, it's these things. Then I asked the second question. You came home from work. You had a really bad day. Now tell me, without a name, who is the person that you want to talk to? Don't give me their name. Don't give me their title. Tell me who they are. And unavoidably, they come up with generous, good listener, caring, empathetic, right? These are the things. So what I've been struggling with is, why is it when people ask who we are, we give physical characteristics or roles, and we don't say the thing that people actually care about, which is who we are as a person. And I think when you're at the bottom and you really feel you're at the bottom, some of it is that, like, and that's where I tell everybody to start, right? You start with, who do you want to be? And I actually give 35 different words with definitions of what those words are in a being form. And it's like, okay, go ahead, be this just right now. This is not about being this tomorrow or in 2 weeks. This is about the next 10 seconds. I have a thing called future first. It's like, okay, who I'm going to be is, I don't know, caring, let's say. Okay, how am I going to execute that in the next 10 seconds? Right now, and right now, and right now, and right now. So there's no long-term plan here. There's no long-term strategy. It's just right now. That's it. There's no other time except for the next 10 seconds. And so now that's not going to get you, if you're struggling to pay your rent, that's not going to get you your rent paid. There's still things you have to do, like practical things you have to do to get a rent paid if that's your goal, right? So this is something separate and distinct. But you can go about getting your rent paid and at the same time be a caring person, right? And what people have done this is they realize, look, I need to get my rent paid. I'm being kicked out. I mean, I've talked to people who are being kicked out of their place. They're being forced out on the street and need to find a place and they're couch surfing. And it's like, okay, and who are you being right now? Like I can't give you $1 million to solve your problem, right? But the question is, who do you want to be going through this problem? And that's your choice, right? And by the way, I don't have a right and a wrong in this thing. If who you want to be is a cutthroat, whatever, be consistent with it. You're in alignment. I do not have a judgment scheme for what is good and what is a bad way, right? In my stuff. I have, okay, who do you want to be? And if you want to be peaceful while you're going through hell, that's more power to you. And I think that's possible. And I think it's really hard. But the point is to take ownership of that and then be consistent with it. And then you can always change it because it's yours. That's the beauty of it. it's not a set of handcuffs or a prison for you. It's okay, this is who I'm going to be. I'm going to be it. End of discussion. And you go through it and you're being kicked out and you're still nice. And you're like, hey, look, this is maybe sounding dramatic, but that's kind of the goal. Hey, landlord, you're kicking me out. Do you want me to vacuum the place and everything before I leave? Right? Like that's being kind. That's being maybe ridiculously kind to some people. But if you've decided that you're going to be that way, you're going to be kind, and that is what kindness looks like to you at that moment, do it. Right? Then take the next step and do. Right? So that's really what alignment is about.
I have a fun little game we can play right now, and it involves now there were people in alignment in the concentration camp who offered the bread to the patients, their own bread at risk of their own lives. They were in alignment. But what about people that we are more familiar with because they're more famous historically or whatever? Let's each think about a someone that we know in the culture in society who is famous enough for us to know them, who we believe is has been in alignment. If we can name at least one person, I got my guy. Tiffany, do you have a guy or a girl or a non-binary person who has been in alignment, who you can think of?
Yeah, and you know I like feather ruffling, so I'm excited to say. I'm gonna let you go first because I bet you it's the same person as me.
All right. Oh, no, it's not the same person. It's not. Do you guys are you guys familiar with Quentin Crisp?
No.
From the United Kingdom. Quentin Crisp was a writer, but he was more famous for being in alignment, in a sense that his own life was at risk. Just for the simple reason that he was who he was and he behaved the way he behaved. In an era of the 20s and 30s in England, he was like a trans person. And well, I don't, I think they probably identify with a they pronoun. So I'll say they were, wore makeup and dyed their hair, even though they were born, with male body parts. They identified more as non-binary or the feminine and projected that to the world because they had the opinion that I'm not going to wait for the world to adapt. I'm not going to adapt to the world and conform. Their philosophy was, I'm going to wait for the world to adapt to me. And eventually, he wrote a book, and it became quite famous. It was called "The Naked Civil Servant," and that book triggered a whole bunch of press and publicity, and they became pretty famous. They were interviewed by David Letterman in the '80s, and eventually, and they did a lot of talk circuit, but their lives were in danger. They were beat up for being themselves. But and when asked, when someone and a reporter said, "How could you be so brave? Why couldn't you just conform when you realized your life was in danger?" And they said, "I there was no I can't help but be who I am." And that's my example of someone who is in alignment. Quentin Crisp, you guys. Okay, who's next?
I'm kind of really curious to hear Tiffany.
Okay, so I first heard this person's music on any like long-term like whole album level in what year was it? 2011, 2011. And I was like, this guy here, there's certain words that he said that let me know that he was really kind of like taking life by the horns in a very real way. And it's Kanye West. I really, really like Kanye West. Um the guy, he says what he wants to say, and some of it stings a little bit. And there's those points where it's like, dude, you have to accept everybody doesn't have the money to go meditate for hours to kind of see things the way you're seeing it. But because like you either got to have money or be homeless to see things the way he's seeing it, you know? And but I like it, and he just keeps doing it, and he just keeps up in the ante. And I don't disagree. Like there's a lot of things where I'm like, yeah, I don't disagree. I don't know. There were some things that he got in trouble for there, and I know that was a thing there. I don't know the exact particulars of what was said. And I know that sometimes we can conveniently ignore things that we don't want to hear. But outside of that, prior to and currently, and he said some things that have stung me a bit, you know. But when I look at how he is using the concept of alignment to really create a life that he's where he seems quite comfortable, not just financially, but with who he is and how he's moving, you know. And some people, yeah, he's made a lot of people bothered. He's made a lot of people really, really bothered with some of the things he said and some of the things he's done. And I also think that that's human, and it challenges us to find grace, you know, and to maybe see if there's a grain of truth in the things that he's said, you know. So yeah, Kanye, that's my guy. That's my guy.
Nice.
All right, your turn, Chris.
Well, so I have two. Um, I should also note I have maybe a particular opinion on trans stuff in general. Mostly, and we can talk about that after. But when I was young, one of the reasons my parents got divorced is my mom came out being gay in 1983, which was a very, very different time to be gay. And my family is very Catholic, so you can imagine growing up in that type of environment, how that impacted me and my opinion about some of those things. My mom actually is a coach for transgender people. So, and it's by the way, I still always loved my mom, so there was never. We can talk about that later, but I'll answer your question first. Um, so can I say two? Because I have two that are very different. Now, and I want to give this one caveat. See, for me, alignment is not about physical things. So, like the whole man and woman thing, I don't believe that it's good to, well, let's say it like this. That's not the right word. Um, this is going to end up leading to another story. So I have family who don't like transgender people, and they have a lot of issues around that. And I asked them, I said, have you ever met a drag queen? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, well, why not? If I introduce you to one, are you open to like change your opinion? Because I can tell you, I know a drag queen, and she's like amazing. Like she's like the nicest, funniest, coolest, most lively person I've ever met. And but you see how I'm describing her. I'm describing her in this way. And all they saw was a trans person. They didn't see the lively person. They didn't see the funny person. They didn't see the kind person. They didn't see any of the stuff that actually matters. And so I like to move the conversation away to who is this person? It's like if you're a priest and you're a mass murderer, then I put you in the same category as the trans person who's a mass murderer, right? It's like because who you are is like hateful killer, right? If you're like nice and kind and generous and funny and all the I put you in the same category. I don't care what you look like. It just doesn't matter to me. So I really like to focus on that depth. And that's why I'm going to come to two. That's why I have two. I have one I have one that you might find surprising for me, and one not. One is Keanu Reeves. And I don't know these people in depth, but Keanu Reeves, he's not only do you see him when in interviews say things that are really profound and generous, but then you see him doing these really profound and generous things. And you hear about him doing these really profound and generous things, and you never see him out grabbing the spotlight to be the big guy. He's just doing what he's there to do, and he's helping, and he's not looking to be shown up about it or anything. And I find that like a type of alignment that I really appreciate. I also think the former president Carter was the same. is very aligned with who he is, and he did that all the way to the end of life. Now, the one that might surprise you is I actually think Donald Trump is aligned. I think he says, and he shows you exactly who he is. And I think it's, so I'm not a Donald Trump fan. I'm sorry. If there's some of your audience might not like me for that, I apologize. But that's the way I feel. And I will never, I'll never be a fan for many reasons. But I do believe he's very consistent. He's very aligned. He's like, if you listen to what he says and you watch his actions, he tells you exactly who he is, and then he acts exactly aligned. He is aligned, right? So those are mine, anyways.
Tiffany, I saw your head moving.
Because alignment, it's not about liking it. It's just about seeing it. It's just about seeing like this person is playing chess. So if you're playing checkers, you might want to learn how to play chess. Certain people are playing this life, and so yeah, I was gonna say good old Donald Trump. And I'm not a fan. I'm a fan of alignment though. I'm a fan of somebody playing the game
Yeah.
and making the pieces move how they want them to move. And that goes back to that video you have. I watched your video about, and you talked about it earlier about manipulation and knowing your triggers and knowing those different things about yourself and knowing that there are some people, how do we do you have some cheat codes for us? Because people are playing the game that aren't that are playing the Hunger Games, and we're trying to play, flag football.
You know,
What do you, yeah, you understand. Go ahead.
one of the things when it comes to the safety triggers, the one of the things we do is we actually use them on the people we love the most. If you really look at the people you love the most, you actually know them the most. And if they say something upsetting to you, you know exactly what to say. You know exactly which trigger to push. And we push it. And we do it automatically, like we know. And sometimes we even know when we're going too far. We can go, "Ooh, I know exactly what to say to punch you in the face verbally right now." And all you did is just learn their triggers. We actually open them up. We put them out there to the world, right? We do it. We, as people, just watch us and observe, and we watch each other like we are a social creature. We do it. There's some people who go, okay, they just totally take advantage of it. And by the way, salespeople, if you ever watch a salesperson who goes into an office of a purchasing person, the first thing that a good salesperson will do is they'll go ahead and see how they can find a way to relate to them. Oh, you have two kids playing basketball. Oh, my kids play basketball too. They're looking for something common. They're playing on the trust trigger because they know as soon as I can identify with you, now we have something in common and you'll treat me differently. We become part of the same club. So we're using these things all the time. And so the thing that you can do is watch yourself. And it's really, really hard. And that's also part of alignment. So what I tell people to do is, okay, and you have to understand what I mean by being, because being is a very particular word for me. If I say who I'm going to be as peace, then how do I know that I'm not being, how do I know that I'm being, triggered? Well, all I have to do is go, okay, why am I not being peace right now? I'm the one who said I'm going to be peace and I'm not. Oh, it's because, I don't know, the bank screwed up my stuff and now I don't know how much things are going to have. And oh, my delivery is late. And oh, this person is being a jerk to me at work. It's like, oh, those are all the things that trigger me and drive me out of alignment. Good. Now, what is that? How do I avoid that? How do I not let that get to me? How do I deal with that in a way that's more aligned with peace? And that it's very, very hard. It's really a workout, but it's a workout of becoming who I am and understanding what's driving me around and what triggers me, and then being able to mute it, right? And in the worst case, so one of the things I do, so my son, he knows how to push my triggers. And so I've learned to smile and go, okay, he's doing this. How could I respond in a loving way to to let him know that this isn't okay? How can I respond to train him? And so sometimes I'll actually be mean. I'll put on a mean face and I'll be like, stop. And what I realize is even the anger stuff that would come from a trigger, it can be useful. But if you've planned it, if you're organizing it such that it's having the impact aligned with who you are, then then use it. Like use your stuff, but just don't let the stuff control you. You control it rather than allowing it to drive you around.
Is there a relationship between being conscious and being in alignment?
Well, consciousness is a super interesting topic, and we could talk about this for days. Um, Firstly, just so that you know, there is no agreement in the scientific community of what consciousness is. So there's this thing that we call consciousness, and nobody knows what it is. And in
Well, let me define it as I see it, and then maybe you can address consciousness and alignment based on this definition. Consciousness is being aware of yourself, being aware of your thoughts, acting with and behaving in a way that is thoughtful. Okay, go ahead.
so consciousness actually gets, so I understand the awareness thing. That is a kind of a common thing, and anesthesiologists might use that and say, okay, are you aware of being cut open? So we give you an anesthetic and you're unconscious, and therefore um, there's no consciousness there. We've turned it off, right? Um, but a philosopher might look at that very differently. And if you look at the hard problem of consciousness, it's looking more at the ability to have a to have an experience of something, right? So like, for example, to experience redness. Let's take a step back. So imagine you have, and this is a very famous thing. So imagine you have a professor who was born, she's a professor now, but she was born blind. And what she decided to study was the color red. And she studied the color red her whole life. So she has an awareness of every piece of knowledge there is about the color red. And then imagine there's a revolutionary surgery that can give her sight for the first time. And so she opens her eyes and she sees red for the first time. Okay. There is something she just learned that she didn't know before through the act of seeing the color. Right. She'd known everything there was to know about red, except that fact that she just experienced it for herself, it was a new piece of information. And she could never have got it any other way. And so some people believe that the ability to experience something like redness, as an example, is a critical part of consciousness. So that's why it's like, okay, awareness is one thing, yes, but then there's this other stuff, right? Like there's a very famous paper that was written called "There's Something Like It to Be a Bat," and that's something like it because a bat has, echolocate. They see the world in another way, and so there's something like it to be that, which is distinct and different than there's something like it to be me. And so again, they're looking, okay, where is consciousness in that conversation? So, and then you have the quantum physics part of it, right? Because this goes back very far. And so, Sir Roger Penrose, who's a Nobel laureate, he's worked with a couple other professors, and they've independently discovered some things. And they're actually believing that consciousness is the collapse of the wave function, which is totally weird. Sorry, excuse me, I have my son here. He's crying. I don't actually know what happened. So I hope it's okay to take a...
I will pause the video.
Come.
We're back. Chris, why does any of this matter?
Yeah, so once we understand that there's this thing about us, which is consciousness, which a lot of people believe is separate from the brain, we have this space in which we can create ourselves different than our bodies. And what do I mean by that? If I say, and we get back to that really interesting thing about if you called somebody when you're having a bad day, who is it that you would want to call as a person? And you find out empathetic and all of this stuff. If who I say I am, if I declare that to start with, me as the conscious me, if I declare who I am as peace, who I am as empathy, who I am as passion, and then you act into that, what you'll find is as you act into that, and you say, like, in every instant, right now, you ask yourself the question, who am I being? I said who I'm going to be is peace. Am I being peace right now? Yes or no? Anything that your brain, so if the answer is no, anything that's going on in your brain, anything that's going on with your excuses you tell yourself, any of that stuff, that's your body reacting. That's you being triggered. That's you being dragged around by your survival machine. I actually call it your meat suit. So you're being dragged around by this. And then you have a choice. Do I go along with what my brain and body are telling me? Or do I remain aligned with my own commitment to who I am in this moment? And it's not about tomorrow or the next day or becoming peaceful. Everything starts right now. So once you understand, and you can, and I dig into the consciousness in that because I want it to be scientifically accurate. I want to understand it as deep as I can. And I want to make sure I'm not giving people information that's wrong or that could injure them. It's one of the big concerns I have about a lot of the other guru stuff going on is if you follow this to its conclusion through all of the science, does it actually make your life better? And if you go into this direction where you start with who I am, then what you learn about is yourself. Learn about how does my brain work? What stories do I tell myself? What triggers do I have? And then you can decide to go along with those, which will feel good, right? Because you're just giving your body what it wants. Or you can build yourself into who you want to build yourself into as an individual, as a person. And they're fundamentally distinctly different. Now, the interesting thing is it feels good to go along with what your body just wants you to do. But that's because of habit. And if you start out and you say, hey, look, who I am is peace, over time, as you do that over and over and over and over, you rewire your brain. And then by staying consistent with this new thing of the declaration of peace, long time from now, it'll feel good. So you can actually change what feels good over time through a declaration, a creation of who you are. It's kind of weird. There's a Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz says you have a brain that changes itself. And then what happens is all of their triggers, all of your stories, all of it get realigned to this new way of being. And you can create it. So that's why this is important. And the science is just there to make sure that I'm being accurate and that I'm making sense. So I also teach at university. So I need to make sure that the professors of these different things don't say, hey, look, this is a bunch of bunk. You know, the science says this. So I need to defend it in front of the experts, in front of cognitive behavioral therapists and professors of psychiatry and neuroscientists and all of that. So I need to be able to have those scientific discussions with them. But from an experiential point of view, it's different, obviously.
Tiffany, you look like you're meditating, receiving Zen information from Buddha.
Yeah. No, I get it. I think I get it. It's just it's an incremental moment by moment thing that you're doing. So in that point is I would see where the meditation comes into play, where you got to kind of watch yourself and change your mind second by second, like literally second by second.
Yes.
And brick by brick. So what you're speaking of the mechanics of it.
Well, I mean, think about it. There really is no time except for the present, right? The past is a memory and the future doesn't exist yet. So right now is the time to make those choices. Only right now. Even if you say, I'm going to do it tomorrow, when tomorrow comes, it's right now that you have to make the decision. So it's always going to be right now. Like that, you're always going to make the change in how you're behaving, how you're thinking in this instant. In other words, it's just a decision to potentially do something in the future that may or may not do, depending on how you feel in that moment of the future. So by starting right now and right now and right now, and asking yourself that question, you take action when it actually matters. Right? And you can imagine if you're in an argument with somebody that you really love, and you ask yourself that question right now, am I being the type of person that I want to be in this moment? If the answer is no, it's like, okay, what do I need to get there right now when it's going to matter? The argument's right now. There's no point in regretting it after you already did it.
Hey, Chris, is it more important to be living in alignment than it is to be just a good, decent, moral person?
Well, I would argue that they're not disconnected, right? I mean, unless you think alignment is I want to like be somebody really bad, in which case obviously that's your choice. I also believe there's always a choice to make. So I always tell people alignment is not a prison, right? If you're going through something and you're angry and you're like, you know what, right now I'm just not going to be peace. Just deciding not to. It's your life, it's your choice, right? And it always will be your life and your choice, always. Just the question is, as you're going through, how do you want to, what is the foundation you want to make the choice? I mean, when you say what is moral, well, that's also a choice in a lot of aspects, because what's moral for one person may be immoral for another. And me having lived abroad and cross-cultural stuff, I'm always like, wow, really, you think that way? And when you listen to their logic, for them, it's moral to do something that I would think is immoral. And it's like, interesting. It's an interesting way that you create the criteria in order to make your decisions, because those criteria and the weighting of those criteria is different. So, for example, I don't want to give away the country because I don't want to sound bad. I lived in a country where bribery was acceptable. It's not acceptable to me. And they looked at it and they said, look, my job is to take care of my family. That's the number one thing. And I need a network to do that. And the network help each other. And you might call it bribery, but I just call it helping out somebody else so that I maintain a strong network. And my network in general is strong. Because if I have more and they have less and they need this in order to facilitate so I can even get more, what's wrong with that? And I went, well, I still don't agree, but I get why you're thinking in that way. And when I was there, I got in a lot of trouble because I actually stopped the bribery, and I just didn't appreciate it. And there was a lot of people very, very angry with me for that. But
Well,
that
I
was me
mean,
being moral and them being moral in different contexts or different ways of thinking.
all right, let's put morality aside for a minute, but we discussed in our previous iteration examples of people who were in alignment according to what we believe alignment to be, and so there was, Kanye West, Donald Trump, a couple of presidents, but some of these people are, greedy and very selfish. So is it possible to be greedy and selfish and still be in alignment? And I think it is
Absolutely.
absolutely right. However,
Absolutely.
these traits in humanity of greed and selfishness is probably what is leading one of the main reasons why the race is in danger, correct?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you read Adam Smith, he's functionally saying that in fact you need to create a system that just accepts that people are greedy and selfish, and then allow that, because you're not going to stop it. And so he just assumed that this is a natural part of being human, and therefore we need to create systems that just allow it to exist because you can't change it. But that's a societal issue. I don't tend to focus on the bigger issues. I tend to focus on the individual, because how everybody else is being is perfectly fine for them, but that doesn't have to be fine for me. And so I should be able to go on despite that, right? And this is where the Viktor Frankl stuff comes up in the concentration camps. It's like, yes, everybody else is stealing bread from these people, but that's not me. So even if it might kill me, I'm going to share my bread because that's who I am. That's a behavior consistent with who I am right
All right,
now.
so you have people in alignment sharing bread, but there's also people in alignment hoarding bread, right?
Sure.
All right, so is it more important to be someone who is sharing bread, or is it more important to be in alignment?
So I think it's more, for me, it's more important to be in alignment, because sharing bread is a perspective, right? That person who's stealing bread, you don't know anything about why they're doing it. You have no idea. You could say, look, I have to get back to my 6-year-old child because they really need me because they're sick and I want to get out in order to do this, and I'll do anything for that. And you go, okay, well, when you listen to their story that you don't know what's going on otherwise. And it's easy to judge without knowing the whole story. And it's really hard to know the whole story. So for me, I really stay focused on me. Who am I? Who am I going to be right now? And then I let other people be who they're going to be. And that's probably the best I'll ever be able to do, because I really can't know everything about that other person. And so I don't, I know my friends, but I don't focus on needing to know everybody else. Because it's hard to work on yourself anyways, right? There's a lot of energy and effort that goes into that.
So being in alignment, that means working hard on yourself?
Well, think about it like this. You have a survival machine that's built to survive. And that's not all of you. That's just a part of you. And then there's another part of you, and you can call it spirit or soul or consciousness or whatever you want, being, that may want its own thing. It may have a desire or a drive to be somebody that's particular. And maybe that's generous, or maybe that's caring, or whatever. But there's always going to be this conflict. You don't get out of this body as long as you're alive. Like it's part of you. So what you can do is you can reprogram it, you can redesign it, you can change it to be aligned with who you really want to be. And that's hard. It is hard work, especially when you look at all the stories you tell yourself for your whole life that have all come together in order to have you consider what your next thing that you're going to do is. I mean, think about the person who goes out and then somebody calls them a name, and for some reason they have a story when they were a kid that the bully called them that name, and now they're bigger and they're stronger, and they just need to take that out on that person. They just, their body and their brain, everything is supporting them to just go beat them. But who they are is peace. And it's like, okay, well, if I want to stay consistent with my declaration, I need to let this go. I need to move forward in what my declaration is. And that's hard. It's just hard. So it takes a lot of energy and effort.
Tiffany, go ahead.
So thank you. So the idea of alignment, the way I was, and I'm asking and telling here, to me, it seems that when we go back and speak to the people that we were talking about that we say are in alignment, it is using these principles for self-creation very powerfully, but at the emotional and psychological level where that person is. Right?
Maybe. I mean, your emotional and psychological level is the barrier, or
Yeah.
it can be the barrier. And
Yeah.
so the question is, okay, is it a barrier I'm willing to just deal with right now, or am I ready to change it? Am I ready
Yeah,
to be aligned?
exactly. Because what I feel like is when I look at, the folks that we discussed last time, I look at it as people who are using the principle of alignment, like, I'm gonna go do this, I'm gonna go be that.
Mhm.
But and doing it and building cult-like followings behind themselves, around and everywhere. So that's a level of alignment in a very powerful way. And then there's the part where you're doing the self-work, where you're realizing, hey, maybe I'm inciting violence with this behavior. And maybe I need to do something different. And then you go to a different level and a different level, and you kind of look at it from, the different spiritual standpoints. Is that accurate, or am I just adding to?
Well, it's a great segue, actually. So the question is, okay, you want to be peace, you want to be whatever, why? And so there's the next step. And what we're building here through this process actually is a mission statement, a personal mission statement, where you say, I am, you fill in that blank, so that, then there's what you're going to put into the world. Because why be? And then I have another acronym called SPICY. And so it means, so you're looking for something that you want to put into the world, and it's your purpose. Like, why am I here? What do I want to leave in this world? And now I'm going to answer your thing really quick, because I want to get on to a little bit about what SPICY is and what that acronym means. Some people, why they're here is not really a choice, and they regret it later. They're guided by, can be anger, hate, wanting to prove somebody wrong, all kinds of other things. And so they need to be self-justified. So who they are is strong and powerful, so they can justify to their parents that they deserve to have love, to be loved, right? And that's their whole purpose in life. And it's empty, right? And they find out it's empty later on. Maybe not always, maybe they just keep going because they just don't have anything else, because that's not how they've established themselves, and they've lost track of why they started this journey, and they just keep going because the momentum of their life that they've built. So I created this aspect of spicy so that you can do it intentionally. And spicy, it stands for so stable. So something that's been there for a long time. Like, it's not something that's fleeting. Like, I'd really like to save the planet, and the next month, well, those dogs at the shelter. Like, it's something that's been around for a while, that's really been in your soul. You can feel it. And it's by the way, it's got to meet all of these to work. It's personally meaningful. So it's something that really is meaningful to you. Okay. So the first two are really about you. Then it starts moving, inspirational. Now, something that inspires you and inspires other people. So, and this is some of the formatting that you do when you create it, right? So we have SPI. C is community oriented. So it's about others. So it's something you're going to put into a community, right? So it's stable, it's personally meaningful, it's inspirational to you and others, it's community oriented, right? And lastly, it's you. It's something that answers your why. Like, for me, what is this? My why? Is this why I'm here? Is this why I get up in the morning? So what I ask people to do is, when it's like, okay, who I am is peace or love or joy or whatever. Well, so what? So that what are you going to put into the world because you're this? And that completes the whole circle of I am this so that this. And it's each one of those things in the acronym have a purpose. I'll just talk briefly about community oriented. Humans are very social creatures. And if I'm doing everything for myself only, then at some point it becomes flat. At some point it becomes less, because there's very little we can do without other people. And people don't realize that. So you turn on the faucet in your house, that water comes out of that tap because somebody else, a whole bunch of other people actually are doing it, right? You turn on that electricity, it's the same. You get in your car and you go to a gas station, it's the same, right? You go buy your food, it's the same. Like, you can lock yourself in the house and say, I'm an introverted, but you still can't survive with other people unless you're willing to be dropped out in the middle of the forest someplace and do everything from scratch. And you see that people even who live out in the middle of nowhere, they still got to go to town from time to time, right? Because you need maybe matches or whatever else, and you can't make your own matches. So it's very, very hard to live without other people, and it's very lonely. There's very few people who can really, truly deal without any human contact whatsoever. So to not consider that as part of why you're here, it's missing out on what your survival suit needs, right? And now when we're talking about now we're talking about also integrating with your survival suit and the community at large, right? And so that those two pieces together kind of complete that whole mission statement. I am this, so that this, and the so that is what I'm going to put into the world. Some people might call it legacy, right? Your legacy. And then you want to make sure you're spending your time and your energy and your effort putting that into the world. Like, that's the thing that lets you get out of bed in the morning. And it doesn't have to be huge, right? It doesn't have to be changing the whole world. It can be just changing the life of one or two people. It doesn't have to be huge. And it's something, and actually with spicy, I actually have 4 different ways to activate it, right? So you have like spicy little perspectives, where you just start looking at things that are more aligned with your spicy purpose. It's just literally looking at something that you used to look at one way and seeing it in a way that's actually aligned with your spicy purpose. Spicy little treasures, which are like little teeny tiny things you can do, like, pick up a piece of trash, right? Or just say hello to somebody, or just ask the person that you go get a coffee with, like, how's your day doing, and getting to know them. There's little things you can just integrate into your day. They don't have to make massive changes. The next one is spicy little projects, which are when you take on a little project. And it can be something as simple as saying, you know what, I'm going to go to the homeless shelter and I'm going to do this thing once a week for the purpose of, and it's aligned, right? But you're doing it for a reason. Like, you want to help, I don't know, 3 homeless people. You want to start a project that helps 3 homeless people get into real housing, right? Or be able to find jobs that are sustainable. Can be whatever, right? I did one where I helped ventilator dependent kids be able to have water gun fights, right? Because I love having water fights. It's my fun thing. And ventilator dependent kids who are in wheelchairs, who are breathing through a tube, and some of them are steering their wheelchairs with their tongues, And I'm like, I want those kids to have that pleasure of being able to have squirt gun fights. So I actually created voice activated squirt guns that can be strapped to their wheelchairs. So I could just scream, ah, I got these kids running around stealing their wheelchairs with their tongues and going, ah, and firing squirt guns. But that was mine, right? That was one of my little projects. And then you want to make it sustainable so other people are inspired by it and take it on and take it beyond you. And then the very last one, the one I recommend you don't do until you've done the other three and you've exhausted them, are spicy life revolutions. And that's where you really get up and you go, I'm going to move to another place and I'm going to start something totally different. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to do whatever you're going to do and totally change your life. A lot that's more aligned with this whole mission statement of yours. But I typically tell people, don't do that until last. Start with the perspective, build yourself up, give yourself the time to really understand and build yourself into who you want to build yourself to be. Start implementing it on small scales and build up before you make that big leap. So this all kind of goes together, right? And then the hard part was making it all consistent with science, with philosophy, making sure that it was also consistent with religions, right? So I talked with all the Abrahamic religions to make sure it was still, the ideas were still consistent down to their core. And then, like I said, the science and the philosophy as well. So.
All right, we have to wrap up in the next 2 minutes. Tiffany, do you have anything you want to say? No? Yes? No? No? Okay. So Chris, close us out with something in the next 2 minutes that you feel our modest audience should absorb.
Well, I think people who want to make the world a better place, if you want to define what that means and then start with yourself before starting with others, you can make the biggest difference. And I'll never forget the story of a priest who said he wanted to change the world. And, over time of wanting to do this, he said, you know what, I think I'm going to change just my area, my country or my state. And then he realized that was probably too much for him. And he said, I just want to change my community. And then he realized, wow, that's really tough. And at the end of his life, he said, if I can just change myself, that's going to be quite an accomplishment. And if people will just start with themselves and work on themselves and get beyond their own barriers and start being consistent with who they want to be in general and going beyond their own stuff, I think in general, the world will become a better place just from people doing that rather than focusing outside first.